this is how I envision the full view of society in a very simplified way. And now I will show how I envision the full view of household management. Very briefly as well. I will not comment because as I'm recording this, I already produced and published 2 videos in which I thoroughly comment my view of ethics. Basically, this is how I envision a full view of ethics, namely in order to be healthy individually, psychologically, physically, spiritually, and to behave ethically, most or all the categories have to be ordered. It's a map in a way. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to show these 2 documents briefly to show the full view in a brief amount of time. And I will not talk about ethics as such in this video. I intend to talk about Das Sollen, Ontology, reality and the ideal, and the logic of judgment. But before, I just show a few books. Waste, Uncovering the Global Food Scandal, The Truth About Processed Food and How It Poisons People and the Planet, and The 100-Mile Diet, A Year of Local Eating. So if I had to give very good pieces of ethical advice in a very short amount of time, it would be: stop eating poison, eat local, fresh, organic and healthy, and stop wasting food. Yeah. That would be the best pieces of advice that I could give in a very limited amount of time, really to begin taking care of oneself, of the planet, of one's own budget and wallet, one's own health, and of others. Yeah, that's what I've learned over the month. Start by adopting a healthy diet. It's very useful. So, I intend to record a video about ontology. I have started writing to maybe eventually publish a book, and as I was writing, I let my thoughts unfold, and I know that I have really brilliant ideas. Sometimes they are, in a way, they are a little bit rough, in the sense that they are not completely polished, because I am a process, but I think I had really interesting things to say. So I intend to talk about a very complex topic, ontology, metaphysics, and speculative logic, but I have very interesting and intelligent things to say. It will be a little bit demanding intellectually to follow what I say, but I will try to make myself clear, and I know that I will say very intelligent things which can be very enlightening if people can make the effort to think about this. And also briefly a metaphor, I thought about this a few weeks ago. I envision myself, when I produce videos, in a way, like a cook in a restaurant. Of course, the purpose of a cook would be to serve the best meal possible in terms of taste, diet, but also presentation, and to produce really high quality food. That would be the ideal of a really good cook. But the reason why my videos have been the way they have, not very good necessarily on many or all aspects of formal presentation. It's not very ordered and structured always. It's not consciously planned. It's not edited, etc. But precisely because I, in a way, I have a tendency of wanting to share food, in a sense of food for thought. Namely, I imagine myself having to share with others, potentially any person interested with an internet connection, to feed the mind food for thought. So that would be the nutrients. I try to provide intellectual nutrients, and that's why the quality is not always excellent in terms of presentation, or is not completely finished. I thought about this. The metaphor might illustrate what I've been doing for 18 months almost now. I'm torn between, on one side, the temptation to provide really excellent products, but it requires time, effort, and it's very demanding in terms of investment. It's not that I'm not willing to make the investment, but I have a lot of things to do, and the world is very complex, and I have a lot of problems to think about and to try to solve. So there's this one temptation to produce perfection, to wait until I have succeeded in producing perfection, I don't know, but something which is really excellent on all or most aspects, and the temptation to share with others something which is not finished, but to provide nutrients for the mind, food for thought, to help them grow or develop or improve on their part. So yeah, this explains why, and also I am under constant pressure. So I have these two tendencies, and many years ago I had the temptation to gather knowledge before sharing anything, but it kind of backfired. So I have adopted the other view, namely to share. I have shared countless references, books, authors, videos, knowledge, etc. But I've noticed that it doesn't function either, so I try to balance the two. I work every day on my side to really improve the quality. I gather knowledge, I structure my documents, I read books, etc. So I work for myself, but eventually all the knowledge that I accumulate, it is stored in my mind, and I am able to share it, either more interesting knowledge, or to share it more clearly, or to speak more fluently, etc. But also I try to share food for thought. So yeah, that's, if I had to describe the situation as I envision this, I'm like a cook in a restaurant which is torn between trying to produce the best dishes to start a high quality restaurant, and trying to share just foods and nutrients with others, because I feel a sense of responsibility. So yeah, so this video it will be the example of kind of an attempt to find a compromise. It's partly structured, and I know that I say intelligent things, but it's not perfectly planned from start to finish. Yeah, so it's a process. Yeah, I share bits of information or knowledge which are in the process of being improved. If I sat and just sat and read books, I could produce great books, but this is not my primary purpose, precisely because we live in an interconnected world, and there are events which affects a lot of people negatively or not so, but we live in an era of trouble. We live in troubled times, so I try to share with others who are interested, while improving myself to be able tomorrow, not literally tomorrow, but symbolically in the future, as long as I can, to keep sharing better and better knowledge. But I'm well aware that I share moments of my process, so I'm perfectly well aware that my knowledge is incomplete, the way I communicate is not adequate in terms of adequate enough in terms of either it's not entertaining enough, or it's too complex, or it's too bland, or whatever. I know that I can improve potentially on all aspects, but I try to find a compromise. Yeah. So, in this video, I intend to talk about ontology and reality, the ideal, das Sollen, and the logic of judgment. And I no longer read German metaphysics. I haven't for probably more than 7 months, except bits of Kant here and there, but otherwise I don't read metaphysics any longer. But I have been reconstructing with my own, the way I understand this. So this will be only things that I have produced myself, in a sense that that's why it's kind of, it's not completely perfect given the current circumstances, but at least I understand what I talk about. I'm not saying that everything is necessarily true, but it can be very enlightening, and I will maybe enlighten others by enlightening myself, because sometimes when I write down my thoughts and I read them, I say to myself, but damn, I can be very intelligent. I can say really intelligent things, very enlightening things. That's why I'm not really altruistic completely, even when I look to be good, because actually it's in my interest sometimes to watch my own videos, because I say really intelligent things. Yeah. So, I will begin with a little drawing. Do we see? Yeah. This is what I will talk about in the video. Reality and the ideal, or the finite and the infinite, the existence and the essence, and the object and the concept, and the distinction, the gap between reality and the ideal. This gap which has to be bridged, which has to be reduced, which has to be transcended. Precisely, this is the movement is das Sollen. I will explain to the best of my abilities. So I took notes to prepare the video. I will try to communicate as clearly as possible. I was actually the empirical history of how I came to produce these notes, which maybe will constitute this video. I was writing about metaphysics and logic, and there are things that I've understood, and I will try to talk about the category of das Sollen and how it relates to the logic of judgment. And it's very important because it explains a lot. Maybe, okay, it's been almost 15, maybe the first few minutes will be a little bit boring, but the more it goes, the better it will be in terms of clarity. I will say very intelligent things, but it requires focus and attention, because it's kind of complex, but it's a good kind of complexity. Yeah, so das Sollen, that's a logical category in speculative logic. One of the first, if we chronologically in the unfolding, one of the most abstract, the less developed, but it it is in a way at the beginning of the process, but because the process includes all its moments within itself, it reappears in a different forms later in the process. And what is das Sollen? If we had to talk in proper English, translated in English, it could be, or it can be translated as what has to be. It has to. That's the English formulation of das Sollen, or it ought to, it is supposed to, eventually it should. So what is supposed to be in a certain way, what has to happen, or what has to be in a certain way, what ought to be in a certain way, these are English words which more or less adequately express the idea, the category of das Sollen. The best, with my limited knowledge of both German and English, the best term that I think corresponds the most would be what has to. So when I say das Sollen in English, it means what has to be. And why do I talk about this? Precisely because ontology is the doctrine of being, of whatever is. And the reason, if I had to simplify to the utmost, the reason why there is movement, the reason why the world is moved and moves and changes and unfolds and develops, the reason why there is a process is because being is not as it is supposed to be. Being is not as it ought to be, as it should be, as it have to be. And this gap, this ontological gap within being is precisely the cause, the source, the reason why there is movement. Yeah, it's very abstract, but I will explain as the explanation unfolds. Here, these are my words. As I understand this, das Sollen can be envisioned as the urge to transcend the current state of being, to go beyond, in a way. Yeah, so it can be envisioned, das Sollen, that's a very abstract, very poor determination, but it can be envisioned later in the unfolding of the logical categories as the purpose, namely that which is aimed at, the goal, the aim, that which is sought, that which is aimed at, that which has to be brought into being, precisely. That in a way, that's the ideal, and reality has to become adequate to the ideal, and this has to is das Sollen. So, formulated differently, the dynamic ontology of being, of speculative logic, but that's also how being is from a onto-theological perspective, being seeks to become adequate to what it is supposed to be. So being has a purpose, a goal, that's teleological thinking, not theological, but teleological, namely considering the end cause, the final cause. Yeah, I will explain later. Yeah, so being is pursuing a goal, an aim, a purpose, an end, is seeking to achieve an ideal in a way, and in theological thinking, not teleological but theological, in the doctrine of God, that's the end goal, the end purpose, the final aim of history and of God. That's how theology envisions this, that which God is aiming at. And teleological, that's a different word, means considering things from the perspective of the end, the purpose that is being sought, but actually theological thinking is also teleological because it is believed among those who are interested in theology that God is aiming at a goal. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Briefly here I will talk about reality and the ideal. Here I will not make things too complex. But basically, if we really simplify with very simple philosophical distinctions, then there are various schools of thought, but for a simple distinction, reality in a way is that which is. The reality for most people means the objective world, the world of phenomena, the world of material objects, what is out there, and the idea is that which is beyond, and depending on the perspective, there are those who believe that ideas are just in our head and these are mental constructs that we derive from our sense experience. That would be the view of the empiricist. We are plunged in reality. We perceive the objective world through our senses, and our mind has the ability to draw images, representations, thoughts, ideas, concepts about the objects which are encountered through sense perception. That would be the idea that we build, we create, we construct mental representation derived from sense experience. That would be the view of the empiricist. So we make ideas, and they are supposed, here there are the physiology of the understanding how do images and ideas emerge from our encounter with sense perception data. That's what John Locke already talked about in his essay about human understanding. And modern neurophysiologists, they would explain how do external stimuli come to become mental representation. Yeah, there is the epistemological and then the neurophysiological aspect. Yeah, but the empirical view would be we create mental representation, ideas, which are derived from sense experience. And the idealist perspective is that actually the object that we encounter in our experience, they are a reflection of the ideas, the archetypes. In a way, they are an embodiment of the idea. That's the view of Plato. Reality for Plato, precisely, is not the external world of phenomena and appearances. This is precisely a world of appearances. Reality for Plato, that which is true, is a realm of idea that we can access through the mind, and every singular object is a manifestation, a poor or less poor, but a reflection of the ideas of which it is the image. In logical language, the universal is the idea, the singular are the objects, or the essence are the ideas, and the existing objects are a reflection, they manifest their ideas. So, yeah. So for Plato, the ideas have an existence precisely outside of the subject which thinks about the idea, so they have an ontological reality as ideas. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so in a way, ideas are a negation of reality, in a sense that to have an idea about something, one has to leave aside determinations. An object, a concrete material object, is fully determined, or material or not, a concrete object. It can be an institution, a system of law, a political ideology, it can be an economic doctrine. These are objects as well, and they are in a way fully determined, but they are not physical objects, but objects of thought. When we make ideas, or when we think about objects, we leave aside determinations, we abstract, and the result of this process of abstraction is the concept in ordinary language, or the idea in vague language, the idea that we have about the object. If we think about trees in general, or about cars in general, or about women in general, it's more abstract than singular, empirical, really existing trees, cars, or women, because in order to attain the idea, the universal, or the essence, the determinations, which are infinitely varied and different for each singular embodiment, if we talk in a Platonic perspective, embodiment of the idea is infinitely different. Its determinations are unique, etc. But in order to reach the essence, the idea, the concept, we have to leave aside many determinations. An apple, in general, has no specific taste, color, shape, size, etc., etc. It can vary infinitely. There are apples of many size, weight, texture, color, taste, etc., etc. They are infinitely varied individually, but they all contain the essence of applehood, or the idea of apples. Yeah. So to think, to idealize, in a sense, to transform reality into ideas, is a process of negation. That's theoretical activity. To go beyond what is immediately present, what is appearing, the phenomenal realm, and to elevate oneself, that's a way of talking, elevate oneself through the activity of the mind and through thinking, through the work of abstraction, to get to the essence, the concept, that which is true for all the objects, independently of their infinitely varied determination. That which is universal, general, or essential, etc., etc. But, so that's why the realm of ideas, in a way, is the negation of reality. But also reality is the negation of ideas, because precisely when we realize a project, a plan, an intention, a goal, when we act purposefully, we bring about effects in reality. So we negate, by acting consciously, we negate the current state of being, one might say, to bring about that which we want to realize. If we have a plan, building a house, we negate the bricks, the soil, the cement, the pieces of metal or whatever. We negate the way they are. We transform them to put reality in an equation with our idea. So reality is being negated in a way that it has to adjust to the plan that we have in mind. We transform the external world through our work, our activity, to make it adequate to the idea that we have in mind. Yeah. When we bake bread, we turn flour and water and salt. We negate the way they are to bring about baked bread. Yeah. So reality and the ideas both are the negation of the other, but it is a negation which is fertile in a way, because when we think, thinkers, they negate through their activity the infinitely sensuously determined objects to reach abstraction and the realm of theory, which then enables to have broad application or to offer broad understanding. So that's to think scientifically is a way of negating the empirical world, but it's fertile in a sense that it brings about enlightenment, knowledge, applicable knowledge, etc. And to negate, in a sense, to change the external circumstances, to bring about plans, goals, etc. It's also it can be a very fertile way of negating, because it brings change, movement, and it adapts the world to our plan in a way. Man transforms nature through his work to make nature adequate to the ambitions, the will, the desires, the need of man. Yeah. So, the ideal is that which is aimed at, in ordinary language, what is being sought, that which has to be reached, and this has to is precisely das Sollen. Here I will briefly talk about Kant. Kant drew limits to our knowledge. What he said is, I drew limits to knowledge in order to leave room for faith. In the view of Kant, we cannot access what he calls the Ding an sich, which would be the thing which manifests reality, the principle behind the phenomena, so the principle of reality, God, in a way, that which manifests the phenomena that we experience, the infinite or the absolute or God or the essence or whatever. According to Kant, we cannot reach the Ding an sich, the absolute, one might say, because the structure of our mind, in his view, is finite. Therefore, our faculty of knowing the unconditioned is limited. We cannot access the Ding an sich. There is an unbridgeable gap between our limited minds and what we envision as being absolute reality, and only faith might connect us to this unknowable, in the view of Kant, unconditioned principle of all reality that may be called God. So we have to believe that our soul is immortal and that we might that there might be a God in the view of Kant. So we can only believe, but we cannot know because the structure of our mind is limited. Yeah. So the noumenal realm, there are the phenomena, that which appears, and the noumena, that which is supposed to stand or to lie or to be beyond the phenomena and eventually manifest itself and by bringing forth these phenomena. So according to Kant, the realm of the noumena is inaccessible, very formulated differently, the realm of ideas according to Plato. So the infinite, that's ordinary language. It's not necessarily very faithful to the view of Kant, but I try to simplify. The infinite, which is supposed to stand behind the phenomena, is inaccessible because our faculty of knowing is finite, it is limited, it is conditioned, yeah. But we can, according to Kant, through our practical reason, so our pure reason, faculty of knowing through the intellect is limited, but through our will, our morality, the will, by bringing forth actions, we can actualize the noumenal realm because we can think of ourselves as being causal agents, and we can try to actualize through our behavior, through our morality, God in a way, but God in morality. The moral philosophy of Kant, basically, these are the teaching of Jesus formulated in German, basically. Yeah. So that's what I wrote. For Kant, we cannot reach the infinite through knowledge, but we have to actualize the infinite through morality and ethical behavior. And this have to, this what has to be performed, what has to be done, the categorical imperative, is precisely das Sollen, which here is a determination of ethics. To do one's duty means to do what has to be done. It is what has to be actualized, to be brought forth, to be made effective. Yeah. So das Sollen in ethics is simply duty. Yeah. And I wrote for Fichte as well. Yeah. And for Schelling, here I'm not an expert, but I know vaguely, but actually for Schelling, it's partly true as well. He wrote a book about menschliche Freiheit, but also it has to be actualized through art. So for Kant, realizing God would be through ethical behavior. For Fichte as well, that's not how he formulated this, but yeah. And for Schelling, partly as well, but also through art, namely by giving a sensuous presence to the idea of the beautiful, we make God present for the senses. That's the view of Hegel as well. Yeah. Yeah. So das Sollen can be envisioned as the ideal or the teleological drive, namely that which is aiming at something, the final cause, the purpose, the aim, the goal, etc., etc. So here it will be a little bit more complex, but das Sollen, metaphysically, is the absence, in German the Nichtsein, the non-being, which determines the presence, the Dasein. So das Sollen is the Nichtsein, which determines the Dasein. Das Sollen is the Nichtsein, the non-being, the absence, which sets into motion the Dasein, or reality in a way. So the ontological status of das Sollen is that which is not there. If it has to be done, it means that it hasn't been done yet. So it's not really there, but in a way it is there nonetheless, because it is that which drives a process towards achieving the end sought. Yeah. So it's a principle of motion. And here I will just draw another. So I just show this. Reality, in a way, has to become adequate to the ideal, and the bridge, the gap, is precisely das Sollen, which has that which has to occur in order for reality to become adequate to what it is supposed to be. And in ethics, in morality, the ideal is, for Kant, the categorical imperative, or simply, in morality, that would be altruistic, I simplify, altruistic morality, moral progress, and in the realm of law, it would be universal human rights, or the Kant wrote a book about a project for perpetual peace. That's the ideal in politics, that which has to be realized. The ideal has to be realized. That's what is aimed at. Yeah. So now I will just make a brief illustration. So here I talk about metaphysical determination, which are kind of important because they enable to understand a lot, one might say, about teleology. Yeah. But basically what I'm trying to do, not just in this video, but what I have been trying to do and what I will continue to do, is to try to make really German metaphysics intelligible. Yeah. I try to illustrate a very complex determination, but I have understood more clearly recently. So, do we see? Yeah. I just explain. Here are two views of causality, very briefly simplified. The way moderns think, modern scientifically minded people since Galileo and especially the 17th century, is through what in Latin are called causas efficientes, efficient causes. I'm not sure that's how it's translated in English, but causality in ordinary sense, in a way, it's kind of a mechanistic view, namely the view that we have in a modern scientific perspective of causality is that a Dasein, an object, brings forth an effect onto another and set the other object into motion. So the cause of the movement of this Dasein can be a physical object. The cause of its movement is another which sets it into motion. That's mechanistic, a mechanistic view, namely that the reason why objects move or are moved is because there is another object which sets them into motion. Attractive forces in astronomy, electromagnetic forces in daily phenomena, in economics, that's interest and the search for profit, or the search for subjective value in the Austrian theory, removing uneasiness, etc. So, no, precisely. The Austrian view is not mechanistic, it's teleological. But the mechanistic view of efficient cause is that behind every change there is a reason which has caused this change, and the view, the theological, teleological, not theological, but teleological view is that precisely that which sets a Dasein into motion is not another Dasein which has which brings an effect to set it into motion. It's in a way something which is not there, something which is aimed at. Here that's a Nicht-Sein, a non-being which has to become in a way. So das Sollen is the non-presence which sets into motion the current reality in a way. That's the absence which drives the presence to move itself in order to become adequate to what it is supposed to be. So that's reversed from the perspective of modern science. That's reversed causality in the sense that it is not that which is before which brings about current and future movement. It is that which is aimed at, that which is not there yet, which sets into motion the current reality. So that's teleological. Telos means the end, and that's how Mises in Human Action thinks. That's a teleological way of thinking. When men act purposefully, what drives them, what sets them into motion, is an attempt to bring about the result that they have in mind, to realize their plan, their projects, to fulfill a need, and they shape their behavior in accordance with the goal that they are trying to fulfill. So das Sollen, here it's really important metaphysically, in a way, formulated differently in the process. Das Sollen eventually becomes the purpose. Das Sollen is that which has to become, and the purpose is that which has to be achieved, that which has to be attained. So a teleological way of thinking means that the end, here it doesn't mean the end in a sense, the end, the limit, that which stops. The end is in a sense the aim in a way. The goal, yeah. That which is aimed at is not there, so it's not present, it has no reality, but nonetheless, its absence is that which sets into motion the current, the present state of being, the current reality. So here it's really profound, really profound. I express very complex but intelligent views in an ordinary language to try to make them intelligible. The end goal, teleological thinking, in a way, it means that reality is moved by that which is not present, that which is absent in a way, that which has to be realized, and precisely if it has to be achieved, it means that it hasn't been achieved yet, so it's not there, and yet somehow it manages to set into motion, to influence, to causally chain the current reality, to move it forward in a way. So formulated differently, here I really simplify. It's not really accurate, but I simplify. Here we would have, in a mechanistic way of thinking, that would be the cause, and the effect would be setting the other object into motion. So this object would be the cause of the motion of this other. And here in a way that's kind of reversed, because the cause is not there yet, and this object, through the das Sollen, or through the trying to fulfill a purpose, to achieve a goal, it is set into motion. So an effect is brought about on this object by a cause which is not there yet. So that's kind of a reverse way of thinking. but it's in a way it's magical because precisely metaphysically it's very important. That which is invisible, that which is not present, somehow makes itself present through the movement, the motion that it brings into being. And the goal, in a way, the goal, the end goal, the aim, the final cause, is not there as such, and yet it succeeds in drawing towards itself, in attracting the current reality in order to reach that which is supposed to happen. Yeah. This is teleological thinking, but in a way, this is also theological thinking. So teleological means, telos means the end, and theological means, theos means God. So in theology, theological people, they tend to think teleologically as well. They are not connected through their roots, as far as I know. These are two different words, but theological people, theologians, they tend to think teleologically because they believe that God is trying to achieve a goal. So God has set an aim that has to be reached. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I just repeat what I said a little bit earlier. Das Sollen is the absence which determines the presence. So that's the Nichtsein, which sets the Dasein into motion. So, although it's not present, it is present nonetheless. So it's both present and absent. The goal in an action, the goal is both present because it is what drives the action of those who try to attain the goal, but also it's absent. So it's present in the mind of those who seek to attain this goal, but it's also absent precisely because it's a goal, it's not a reality, so it has to be achieved. So it is both absent and present. Yeah, so the Nichtsein, das Sollen, is that which sets the Dasein into motion. Formulated differently, the ideal is that which is not there, that which has not been realized. It is, in a way, it is absent, but it is nonetheless present because it sets into motion the current reality, the current state of reality. So, in a way, formulated very simply, reality is trying to grasp, to reach the ideal. Ontologically, whatever is structured in such a way that what is seeks to attain what ought to be, what should be, what is supposed to be. So being is divided within itself and tries to bridge the gap between reality and the ideal, and this attempt to bridge the gap to make reality and the ideal adequate to one another so that they coincide. This is what drives the process. This is why there is movement. This is why ontology is dynamic. That's the view of process philosophers. Yeah. So, mechanistic causality can be envisioned as the Dasein, whatever is has Dasein. Things, that's another word, but here I talk in a German way. The Dasein is determined by an other Dasein external to itself, that's mechanistic causality. In teleological causality, the invisible, the ought to, that's Sollen, the absence, the non-present, causally determines the Dasein. So, das Sollen, the should, the ought to, is not there because precisely what has to happen precisely hasn't happened yet, but it has to happen. So it's not there, although it's there. Yeah. Precisely because in ordinary language, you should do what you haven't done yet. You have to do what you haven't done yet. Yeah. What has to happen isn't there. Otherwise, it wouldn't have to happen. It would be there, but it's not. So it has to happen because it's not there. But precisely, it has to come into being. Yeah. It's not, here it's a little bit more complex. It's not a simple possibility. What should happen is not what could happen, it is what has to happen. So it's not a possibility that what should happen happens. It's not a simple necessity. It is a necessary possibility. It is a possibility which must become actual. Yeah. So, yeah. Here, this is German subtlety. I understand what I mean simply because, formulated differently, it's a possibility. What has to happen is a possibility which has to be actualized. So it's a, yeah. Das Sollen isn't there. It is absent. It is absent, but its presence is felt nonetheless. So its present absence or its absent presence is, in a way, is so strong that it sets the Dasein into motion. So das Sollen, what has to be, is not there, although it is there. It both is and is not there. That's the ontological status of das Sollen. Yeah. Yeah. So here about precisely the ontological, it will become clearer later in the video. The ontological status of das Sollen, in a way, it is. So what has to be is precisely because it is what ought to be or what has to be. Or in other words, what is das Sollen? Das Sollen is what has to be, what should be. So in a way it is, but also it is not, precisely because it is what is not, only what ought to be, what should be, what has to be. In a way, it is not what is, it is what has to be. Yeah. So it's a rational in a Hegelian sense because it's a unity of opposed determination. It both is and is not. That's the ontological status of das Sollen, and that's why it's contradictory. Because it both is and is not, so it's in a way it's unstable, that's why it becomes, and that's why it brings about a process of movement. Yeah. So, very simply, in mechanistic causal thinking, the past moves the present. In teleological causal thinking, the future moves the present. Teleology, in a way, is alive, self-moving, self-organizing. Teleology is the principle of its own movement, whereas in a mechanistic view, that which is mechanistically moved is not self-moved, it is moved by an other, an external object, which sets into motion. So mechanistic causality, in a way, it's kind of dead, whereas teleological causality is alive because it is self-moving, self-organizing. Yeah. I wrote about the cunning of reason. God uses human passions, human interests, human desires, etc., to actualize himself through morality, law, and history. So humans, they seek to achieve their own individual goals, driven by their own individual interests, desires, and passions, but actually God uses them to achieve his own end. And here, what did I wrote? Yeah, humans, they are not necessarily aware of what drives them. For instance, the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party, the American Revolution, whatever the intentions of the participants were, the result was the creation of the institutionalization of liberty on earth through the birth of the American Republic and with the US Constitution. So whatever the motivations of the American Revolutionary were, the result was the creation of the actualization of liberty through institutions in a country or on earth, the United States of America. So yeah, whatever the intentions of the founding fathers were, the result of their actions was the actualization of God through law and legislation in world history. Yeah. Yeah. So here I will just briefly about purposes and actions, etc. The drawing is not very appealing, but in the here we would have the realm of phenomena, and here the clouds would be the realm of intentions, aims, goals, purposes, and here that's a representation in a way very simplified of the way Mises thinks in human action. The phenomena would be the manifestation of human actions. They can be, in a way, measured to a certain extent. They can be collected, they can be quantified. Economic phenomena, social phenomena, law, historical events, legislation, artistic production, etc., etc. It can be more or less quantified, collected, etc., etc. So we can see the result in a way, but we cannot know the invisible which drives the action of men, namely that would be the ideas in a sense of the goals that they are seeking, the aims that they are aiming at, the purposes that they are trying to achieve. We cannot know this. So human events, in a way, they are driven by invisible forces, human actions, and we cannot know, here that's the view of Mises, we cannot know the content of man's mind, we do not know what drives. I mean, they can say it, but yeah, we cannot know the specific content of man's mind when they act, because most of the time men themselves are not aware of what drives them. Humans are driven a lot of time by unconscious needs or desires or tendencies that they themselves are not even aware of. So the view of Mises is that we cannot, how should I explain this? Mises, in Human Action, says that basically, in the realm of the social sciences, the realm of human endeavors, we cannot use the methods of the natural sciences, namely just to collect data and to establish hypotheses and to measure and to make predictions about the realm of phenomena, precisely because human actions are driven by intent, by goals, by purposeful behavior, and we cannot know the content of man's action, but we can know the form. That's precisely praxeology, the science developed by Mises. I wrote, the specific goals that men seek cannot be known. Why does a politician enters into politics? Is it because he wants to make money, because he wants to gain power, because he wants to serve his country, because he believes in a cause? He can say things, but does he say really what drives him, or is it communication? We don't know. We don't know why a sportsman trains every day. Is it because he wants to make money? Is it because he wants to leave a legacy in his sport? Is it because he wants to achieve greatness? Is it because whatever? Why do writers write book? Is it because they want to communicate novel ideas, new ideas with others? Is it because they want to achieve status? Is it because that's what they are best at? Is it because sometimes we can know because it seems obvious, but sometimes we don't know what drives the motives which drive the actions of men. So yeah, the specific goals, sometimes, or maybe most of the time, they cannot be known, but the structure of human action can. It can be logically deduced, and this is what Mises does in Human Action. Precisely because here in the clouds, these are the aims, the purposes, the goals, etc., etc., and the formal aspect, Mises says, basically is to remove uneasiness, the driving force behind. Purposeful action is simply a will to remove uneasiness, namely to improve one's own situation. That's the formal aspect. And from this premise, Mises then derives and develops the structure of the laws of praxeology, and as a sub-branch of the science of human action, economics. Yeah. Yeah, so precisely, so here I wrote about religion and God. Even if there were no God or no religion, God and religion would still be made manifest simply through the behaviors of those who believe and shape their conduct according to these beliefs. Here I explain what I mean. Let us imagine an atheist, like Dawkins, who said there is no God. Yeah. Let us, I will make a joke, let us give credit to Dawkins. Let us envision his view. Even if there were no God, actually there is a God, but even if there were no God, there are people who believe in God, and this belief influences their action, and to the extent that they act motivated or driven by a belief in God, their behaviors are manifestation of their belief in God. So even if we lived in an atheistic world, there would still be people who believe in God and who act according to this belief, and whose action have influence and consequences onto other. Yeah. That's why God actualizes himself through the actions of the religious communities. Not only because God uses atheists as well to actualize himself. So here I will make a joke. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the atheists unconsciously they do more to promote God than some religious people do. Yeah, no, that's a joke. No, but actually there are atheistic people who behave very, very ethically, nonetheless, and they participate in the process of the actualization of God, even while being unconscious of this. God is not so dumb as not to use the the views of the atheists. Sometimes the atheists they say very interesting things. They produce great works. Not all of them, but some of them. It would be foolish to to leave aside this profitable opportunity to improve human knowledge, science, human morality. Sometimes, So, in a way, God is that which is aimed at by those who act morally, ethically, and religiously, namely those who behave ethically in the name of God. In a way, they actualize God on their individual level by setting their behavior onto the ideal that they are seeking to reach. Yeah. So even if there was no God, God, to the extent that the idea of God inspires people to behave well, it would still be very useful. But thank God, there is a God. Yeah. But yeah. I wrote also, that's why, what I said just earlier with the drawing, that's why empiricism is not enough in the social sciences, because empiricism doesn't think in a way. That's the problem with empiricism, is that the empiricists, they do not think, they just collect data. I wrote, these are bureaucratic scientists. And here I have, that's what I wrote. I have to praise Mises. I wrote, Mises is a genius, but actually he's a continental Austrian thinker of German language. I know he was a Jew, but he was strongly influenced by the Austrian School of Economics and by the German language and by a continental way of thinking. And precisely, empiricism consists in collecting the data of this realm without thinking too much, without speculating too much about what happens here, namely in the mind of man. And precisely because empiricism doesn't care much about the thoughts of men, or only to the extent that they can be measured, etc., or quantified, it's not very heavy intellectually in terms of weight. So that's why it's not very philosophical in a way. And the continental, I often praise the Anglo-Saxons, rightly so, because their empiricism can be very useful, of course, but continental Europeans, in terms of mindset, even when they happen to be Jewish, like Mises, intellectually, the good ones, they are on a different level. Yeah. And here, I wrote a joke, a good joke. Here's the joke. Say something positive about the Anglo-Saxons. Well, the Anglo-Saxons do not trouble themselves with very complex thinking. That's a praise. That's positive. Say something negative about the Anglo-Saxons. Well, the Anglo-Saxons, they do not trouble themselves with very complex thinking. Say something positive about the Germans. The Germans are very complex thinkers. Say something negative about the Germans. The Germans are very complex thinkers. That's a speculative joke. This is really a good joke, I think. Yeah, it's really a good joke. Yeah. I wrote, the human world is moved by the invisible, by das Sollen, which the animal world is not. And the animal world is moved by physical, chemical, biological forces, but they are not driven by an ideal, in a way. Yeah, that's the difference between men and animals from an ethical standpoint. Animals have no morality, no law, and no law in a sense of legislation. They have no morality, no legislation, and no religion because they do not think. Yeah. And I wrote, there is a constant conflict between the material and social conditions encountered by the acting individuals and the plans of these acting individuals. So the intention, the purposes, the aims, the goal, the ideas, the ideals of men, they encounter material restrictions, the limitations of the natural world, the scarcity of resources, whether these are time, energy, intelligence, strength of humans, or the restricted resources of the external world, or the social, here social means the actions of other men. So the ideas of humans, they confront, they are in conflict with the limitations of the material world and the social world as well, which is the manifestation of the ideas and intents and goals and aims of other men. Yeah. And the historical process can be envisioned as the result of this compromise between what is ideal and what is aimed at and what can realistically be achieved while taking into account the restrictions, the limitations forcefully imposed by the very nature of the scarcity of the material conditions and the limitations of the human condition. So there is a compromise between, precisely because we can measure or collect or register the actions of men, but we don't know what they intended to do, precisely because they encounter limitations. And what happens historically is the result of the conflict between the ideal and the real, and the ideas of others are the reality of those who have ideas. In a way, reality here means the limitation. Human beings, they are idealists in a sense that they think and they act purposefully, but the ideas of all other human, for each human, the ideas of all others, which are made manifest through institution, market forces, legislation, behavior, ethics, etc. It's a reality in a sense that it is that which limits one's own behavior. Yeah, and the compromise between the mutually conflicting interactions of all the acting individuals are human societies and the historical process. Yeah. I wrote, idealism is a very powerful moving force. That's, in a way, that's the power of the negative, because precisely the ideal is that which is not here, although its influence is felt through the actions of those whose behavior is determined by the ideal end or the ideal goal that they seek to reach. That's why the world is moved by ideas. And when I wrote a few thoughts about this, I thought about Marxism. There are some interesting insights in some Marxian or Marxist analysis, but actually the appeal that Marxism has onto a lot of people is a refutation of dialectical materialism, in the sense that Marxism is utopian thinking. Here it's not neither a praise nor derogatory, it's simply utopia means that which is not there, that which is not present. So it is the force of political idealism which moves a lot of Marxist people or people influenced by Marx. Yeah, so that's why. How should I explain this? What I'm trying to express is that even the most rigorously materialist thinkers, here materialist means from a philosophical perspective, in a way their ideology, when it appeals to people, it is through the force of the political idealism that it promotes. That's what I'm trying to express. Namely, formulated differently, of course, people who are poor or in difficult material conditions, they want to improve their condition, so they are determined materially. That would be a Marxist analysis, a classical orthodox Marxist, namely the position in the process of production influences the consciousness, etc. But actually, there are a lot of people to whom Marxism appeals as an idea. That's the reason why a lot of intellectuals who are not in any need of material improvement whatsoever, that's why they have been drawn towards this, and that's why it has been so appealing to a lot of intellectuals for the past 150 years. It's not the material condition which lead intelligent leftist scholars to embrace Marxism. It's the idealism, the driving force of trying to reshape reality in order to become adequate to a pre-established utopian situation. Yeah. Okay, I wrote about utopianism precisely. Those who believe that the world is not as it should be, so that there is a divide between how the world is, the reality, and how it should be, those precisely who believe this, and the more they believe this, the more active they are, because they try through their action to bridge the gap and to set reality onto the ideal. I listed example. Historically, the Jews, the Marxists, the evangelical Christians, the utopians of all sorts, they are very active precisely because they have an ideal and they want to reshape, to restructure reality to fit the idea on the ideal that they have. I wrote the most active are very often the most idealistic, even though they might be philosophically materialist, namely not believe in ideas or in God or in spirituality, but they might be philosophically materialist. That's the case of the Marxists, but nonetheless be very idealistic politically, one might say. And usually those who suffer the most are those who are the most active, precisely because when they suffer they want to change the current reality which makes them suffer, so they envision an ideal, and it can lead either to fatalism, that's the case, according to Nietzsche, that's the case for the Russians, sometimes the Muslims, they can be kind of fatalistic, or in a way, in a different way, the Stoics or the ancient Greeks, they also believed in some sort of a fate, so it can bring about a passive attitude in a way, or it can lead to greater activity when reality is not adequate to the idea that one has about reality. And of course, when people suffer, they would like to get out of their suffering, so they tend to envision an alternate reality. And either it can lead to passivity in this world and to envision a utopian reality beyond this one in an other world. That's the Nietzschean view of Christianity, namely, for those who suffer, they envision a transcendent reality. So here the transcendent reality would be the ideal, in which there would be no suffering. So that would be in a way a passive, namely to become passive as regard to this world and to envision an alternative ideal world. Or the suffering can lead to a greater will to change the current conditions, so it can strengthen passivity, or on the contrary, to enhance activity, which is the driving force behind idealistic people. And precisely, the ideal is the negation of the real. Das Sollen is the negative which sets the world into motion, in a way. Precisely because humans do not live, most of them, in the here and now, but they project themselves into the future. So they have a negative. Here it's not moralistic. It's not even morally. It's not. I'm not talking about morality. They have a negative relationship to reality precisely because they think beyond. They plan forward. They have projects. They have plans. They have goals. So that they negate through the mind, by thinking about the future, the current reality, to try to bring about a better condition through their action. Yeah. And I wrote this, what I've just said is about the ideal, the real, the utopia, etc. This is why conservatives always lose, and that's why they don't preserve anything, because they settle for what is. Usually, let's be honest, the conservative, these are usually people who are well off. That's why it appeals predominantly to successful older people, because they tend to be in a better position. They tend to be satisfied with their status and position within the current society, whatever the conservatives are, even the conservative of 200 years ago, or even if they did not label themselves conservatives, the conservatives of all ages, usually these are people whose status within society is good, or at least better than others. That's why, precisely, that's why they are not very idealistic, because for them reality is that's why reality is as it should be from their perspective. Here, that's partly a Marxist analysis. When they are well off, there is no Sollen for them, precisely because from their own interest, their own, I do not judge them, but from their own individualistic perspective, reality, at least the social reality, is as it should be, because they are satisfied. It's not necessarily extraordinary, but they have a good position, good fortune, they are successful, etc. So reality is, in their view, as it should be. That's why they lose constantly over the historical process, because they settle for what is, and all those who believe that reality is not as it should be, those who are driven by das Sollen, they set the world into motion. Yeah, that's why I wrote only on the right. That's why the right has been losing constantly over the past. Then what is the right? If we adopt the view since the French Revolution, it's not the correct view because it's partly true but partly not, because left and right, if they are defined empirically, historically, they begin officially with the French Revolution, but actually if they are defined metaphysically, it existed already before. But here, just for the purpose of illustrating, let us assume that the right and the left emerged over the past 250 years, let us say, simplify. It's not here political history, it's more complex than that, but I've been reading a good book about the history of political ideas. I started reading a great book by Monsieur Nemo, History of Political Ideas in Contemporary in Modernity and the Contemporary Times. Yeah, so here I do not intend to be very rigorous in terms of political theory, but simply I would, that's why that's why the right over the past 200 years, let us say, has kept losing and the left has kept winning. The process in the West is becoming more and more leftward. It is going more and more leftward, more and more equality, rights, interventionism, etc., etc. In a way, there are good aspects. There are good aspects. Here I express an opinion. The liberal left, historically, Jefferson could be considered as a liberal. Actually, the American revolutionaries, they were liberals in their context. Liberalism, political and economic liberalism, what can be sometimes defined as libertarianism in the modern world, in order to counterbalance the socialist tendencies of the self-labeled liberals. So authentic liberalism has become libertarianism in a way because the liberals, they have become social democrats more and more. But the liberal left, here I express a personal opinion, has brought, it has to be recontextualized, but actually it has brought a lot of good. Some of the greatest and most renowned intellectuals over the past 3 centuries have been liberals, and they were in their times, they were in a way some sort of leftist, someone like in a way Jefferson in a way, but also John Stuart Mill, in France someone like Benjamin Constant, and in a way even someone like here precisely, it's a little bit subtle. Monsieur Nemo draws a distinction, that's his view. For him there is the left, the right, and liberal democracy, which is neither on the left nor on the right. So, but if the thinkers of liberal democracy are considered to be liberals, or rather on the left as compared with the historical religious pre-modern right, then thinkers like Hayek and even Mises are kind of leftist, but in the modern world they are on the far right. But here it's kind of complex. That the purpose is not to talk about this too much, but simply what I mean is, historically, the historical process has driven towards the left. Here it means in a sense of equality for the good and for the bad with the excesses. The good, here that's a liberal in the noble sense, in a view, the good would be equality of rights, the progress towards human rights and universal equality of rights, that would be good, but attempts to forcefully impose economic equality through redistribution, interventionism, etc., it's kind of wrong because it hampers human liberty. So when I say liberal in a noble sense, I think about Jefferson and the classical American ideal, which in the modern 21st century is considered to be radical right in a way for a lot of people. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So the right has kept losing most of the time for the aforementioned reason. The reason why the conservatives, they always lose in the long term, and that's what I wrote. Only reactionaries can win, precisely because the reactionaries, they are in a way on the right. Most of the time there can be reactionary leftists. I would not. Yeah, but let us assume reactionaries are on the right. Only they can win and not the conservatives, because precisely for reactionaries, reality is not as it is supposed to be. For a conservative, things are the way they are supposed to be. For a reactionary, they no longer are. That's why Das Sollen emerges, and the bridge, the gap between what is and how things ought to be has to be bridged. It has to be closed in a way. I wrote, that's why Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," it's kind of like dynamite in a way, because it has ingrained in the mind of Westerners that the West is no longer, is no longer as it should be. The West is not as it should be. That's the idea behind the slogan, that there has been a decline and greatness has to be restored, and precisely has to make America great again. That's another way of formulating Das Sollen. Namely, Trump says, in a way, he says, let's make America great again, but also in a more subtle way, he says, you have to make America great again. So he introduces Das Sollen, which is a source of movement. Yeah. I wrote, Trump has triggered and popularized reactionary idealism. He has ingrained in the mind of a lot of young Americans the idea that America shouldn't be declining, and in the mind of actually a lot of Westerners, what I call reactionary idealism, namely that the West shouldn't be in the state in which it currently finds itself in the 21st century, that Westerners shouldn't be declining precisely the way they do. So it's reactionary idealism. Yeah. I wrote, here that's a remark, Western politicians, those who still vaguely have a culture, if there are still, they are burdened by the weight of the past, the cultural, anthropological, and civilizational legacy. The past from a Western perspective, a European perspective especially, but American as well. So here, let us use the terminology Western. The past is kind of embarrassing because it's too great in terms of achievements. Cultural, scientific, economic, military, civilizational achievement. It's a burden because it's too heavy. Yeah. I wrote, the purpose of the powers that be is often to legitimize the current state of being. So to put a veil of legitimacy through public speech, journalists, intellectuals, scholars, etc., artists, to justify the current state of being, so that people be convinced that things are the way they should be, and that things should not or cannot be otherwise. The rulers, most of them, they have an interest in convincing the people that they rule over that things are the way they should be, and either they ought not be different because it would be worse, or they cannot because there is no alternative. So the rulers, they have an intellectual interest in legitimizing, in covering reality. Here reality means the current political state, in covering reality with a veil of legitimacy, so that the people might not be tempted to think that things ought to be different than what they are. Yeah. Yeah. I wrote, the political idealists, in a way, they are kind of dangerous because they negate intellectually reality by aiming for a utopia, which means a place which is not. And the further away their aim is from the current circumstances, the greater das Sollen, the more reality has to be here, the more, it's not the more reality has to be negated, it is the more reality, it's a quantitative determination, formulated differently, the greatest, so the further away their aim is, the greater the quantitative amount of reality has to be negated in order to become adequate to the ideal, formulated intelligibly. That's why communism has been so destructive, because the goal that it set was so far removed from the conditions that it introduced a tremendous gap between the utopian ideal and the very often difficult life condition, that it left room for really idealism and utopianism in a negative sense, in a way, an excessive, a delirium in a way. Yeah. I wrote, political idealism, when it is implemented, it very often fails, precisely because the ideal is that which is disconnected from reality, and it's a lot easier to construct an ideal in one's mind. It's kind of in a way, it's very easy to idealize the real and to produce mental construct, but then to apply them to reality, it's much more difficult, because reality is often more complex than the simplification of the idealist, of the intellectual. Yeah. But I wrote, although, so yeah, political idealism often fails, although, strictly speaking, in the 21st century, and already in the 20th and parts of the 19th, we have lived in the utopian world envisioned by Francis Bacon at the onset of the 17th century, or by the thinkers of the Enlightenment. Steven Pinker wrote a book, Enlightenment Now, in a way. We live in the 21st century, we live in the utopia of the 18th century or 17th century thinkers. And it is a utopia which hasn't failed. There have been problems, of course, but the perspective of Steven Pinker is simply to say that the Enlightenment, in a way, has succeeded, and what has failed from his perspective is that we no longer believe in the greatness of the Enlightenment ideal. That's the only problem, but otherwise, in the view of Pinker, who tried to legitimize the current state of being, in a way, for good and less good, but actually his work is well documented and he offers interesting data and perspectives, but in a way, we live in the successful utopia of the thinkers of 2 or 3 centuries ago. It can be measured, increase in demographics, life expectancy, health, education, literacy, welfare, well-being, economic prosperity, rights, etc., etc. In a way, no thinker of the 18th century would have dreamt to live in a world as successful as the modern world on many regards. On other aspects, there have been very negative consequences, disruption, pollution, exploitation, dumbing down of either through work or through entertainment. There have been loss of stability. There have been many problems, psychological problems, etc. But there have been very good aspects as well. Yeah. A regulatory ideal is good. That comes from Kant. An ideal as a regulatory principle, in a way, to set one's own behavior in accordance with an ideal. But ambition has to be balanced by the proper measure, in a way. Yeah. I wrote a good joke. I already made this joke, but what is America? The modern United States of America, what is it? I wrote, the total sum of all the Americans who believe that America is definitely not as it should be. So, formulated differently, all the Americans who complain about America because America is not as it should be according to them, the totality of all those people complaining about America, this is precisely America. I already made a joke, but basically there are those who believe that America is too white, those who believe it's no longer white enough, those who believe that it's too capitalist, those who believe that it's not capitalist enough, those who believe that there should be reparations for Afro-Americans, for Native Indians, those who believe that America is not intervening enough on a world stage, those who believe that it is intervening too much, those who believe that there are not enough economic opportunities, those who believe that there are too many inequalities, not enough redistribution, too many, etc., etc. Of course, a lot of people in most countries, they tend to complain about the country in which they live, but maybe America is the country where most people, precisely because, here I say something kind of insightful maybe, or enlightened, America, because it promises so much, opportunity, potential, fulfillment, etc., that every American, or most of them who think about their countries, they have their own view of America, precisely because it offers so much opportunity, and that's why there are so many people who think that it should be different from what it is. Yeah. I wrote, Das Sollen is always floating beyond the real, so to speak, but precisely this view, the idea that, here, ordinary sense, the view that there is reality and there is an ideal floating above reality, in a way, it would mean to adopt a dualistic ontology. On one side, there would be what is, and on the other, what ought to be. Whereas the truth is actually the unity of both, namely a dynamic ontology. Dynamism means movement, and what ought to be, das Sollen, what has to be, is included within what is, and this is simply why being is moving. Yeah. The dynamism of Hegelian ontology consists precisely in being seeks to become adequate to itself. There is differentiation within being, and the attempt to restore the identity, to to realize the idea is precisely the moving force of the ontological process. Yeah. So Hegelianism is a monistic, it's ontologically monistic, it's a ontological monism. There is one reality, but it's a dynamic ontology, so there is a movement, that's why it's a process philosophy, and it is aiming towards unity, but precisely if it is that which is aiming at is that there is no unity because there is separation between the ideal and the real, etc. Yeah. I wrote, das Sollen means there is inadequacy within the current state of being. Precisely inadequacy, here it's not in a moralistic sense, it means simply there is no adequation between what is and what has to be, so there is a divide. Yeah. Here a little bit of, I'm not sure it's comedy, but to illustrate, if somehow people watch this for more than 1 hour and 50 minutes, if they have succeeded in being interested for so long, maybe they will be rewarded with illustrations and images. Let us talk about sexual impotence. A flaccid penis should be erect. Here I will say intelligent things while using partly comical illustrations, but precisely a flaccid penis ought to be erect. It has to become erect. I wrote, das Sollen, from the perspective of a man's penis, what has to come into being, the purpose, in a way, is to end up in a fertile, consenting, and preferably hot woman's vagina. That's where it should be. Yeah, that's the purpose, that's the goal, the end, in a way. I wrote, it's in the nature of a man's penis to end up in a fertile, consenting, and preferably hot woman's vagina. That is what is aimed at. That's the purpose. And here I will say intelligent things later. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of... No, I will skip the joke because it's not really... yeah. A penis, from the wife's perspective, the penis of the husband should be erect. It has to be, in a way. Yeah. If it is not, if the penis is not as it should be, you're gonna have problems with your wife. Yeah, a little bit of a joke. That's a joke, that's a joke. Das Sein, that's how things are, maybe. Das Sollen, that's how they should be. Yeah. Das Sein and das Sollen. Maybe the ideal, it's not always... if things are like this, maybe they are not as they are supposed to be. Yeah. That was a little bit of a joke. Yeah. I wrote, when religious people talk about unnatural sexual customs, actually, I might say it's very profound. it's kind of smart because they unconsciously acknowledge that what is natural is the purpose. So they have a teleological thinking, namely the purpose of sexual intercourse is the aim which is sought, the end goal, namely it is procreation. From a religious perspective, the goal, the purpose is to procreate. Yeah. So the religious people who complain about unnatural sexual customs or hedonism, namely sex with no procreation in mind, they think teleologically. I wrote, very intelligent, these religious people, because they understand that the purpose of sex is procreation. So here they view that what is natural is that which is adequate to a goal. That's an Aristotelian way of thinking. And I wrote, what is considered unnatural is what is contrary to the purpose. When sex is not performed with the goal of creating life, it is considered to be unnatural for some religious people, because precisely what ought to be, das Sollen, is that a sexual intercourse has to eventually produce offspring. That's the purpose. That's a teleological way of thinking. Yeah. And here the cunning of reason, Schopenhauer already aimed at this, hinted at this, is in a way sexual pleasure can be envisioned as a trick to fool the woman and the man into having sexual intercourse, because it's often pleasant, but actually that's just a cunning, that's a trick, because this is a means that nature, if we are in a Darwinian perspective, that nature uses to perpetuate the species. And the wife and the husband, they might not be aware, it exists in some tribes, in some primitive tribes who have not discovered yet the connection between sexual intercourse and the production of offspring. So the husband and the wife, they might have a sexual intercourse just because it's physically pleasant for hedonistic reason, without having in mind, without even having the intention of producing children. So in a naturalistic perspective, nature would fool and trick the lovers in order to perpetuate the species. So I wrote, das Sollen means what has to, or what should. It can be envisioned as what should, but also what shouldn't. And animals have no shouldn'ts, except domesticated animals, but otherwise animals, because they do not think, they have no taboos, precisely. The taboo in anthropology is the shouldn't which determines, shapes and structures the behaviors of the members of a human community. The shouldn'ts is what people might be tempted to do, but what they have to restrain themselves from doing, because it is not accepted by the community, because it would hinder the well-being or the harmonious interactions within the community. This is what a taboo is. It's a shouldn't. What shouldn't occur, what has to not occur. And in the modern West, the taboo is not sex. All sorts of once considered deviant sexual behavior are now tolerated. But talking about race is considered taboo, of course, in the modern West. That's the great taboo. This is what people are not supposed to do. But there are taboos which are useful for the perpetuation the cohesion, the maintenance of the cohesion of the communities, and there are taboos which might hinder or seriously harm a community. Yeah, that's the problem with the taboo of race in the modern West, is that it has become a little bit excessive, in a sense that rational debate and rational thinking are sometimes not even tolerated, which in a way forces the community to blind itself and to it produces a psychosis in a way among certain people. Yeah. Okay. Now about judgment from a logical standpoint. So it's connected with das Sollen. Formally, from just a formal aspect, to judge means to predicate a thought determination to a subject, to associate a predicate to a subject. For instance, roses are red, this t-shirt is pink, Belgium is a European country, Per Byland is an economist. Yeah. So formally, a judgment in logic is simply to associate a predicate to a subject. Subject here doesn't mean a human subject, it means the subject of the logical proposition. Any object. This book is a book about the history of political ideas. This book is the subject of the proposition. This book is about the history of political ideas. Yeah. So the subject is concrete, namely it's fully determined. It's a unity of multiple determinations, and the predicate is an abstract determination, one determination among the many that the subject has. For instance, roses are red. First, not all roses are red, but if I say roses are red, some roses are red, that's a judgment. Red is a predicate which is attributed to the subject here, some roses, but roses, they have other determination than the color red. They have a certain shape, a certain smell, a certain chemical composition, a certain certain biological features. They can be classified but from a botanic standpoint, etc., etc. These are physical objects. They might be economic commodities, so they have many other determinations, and red is just one determination. Per Byland is an economist. That's just one predicate. Per Byland has many other determinations. Yeah. Belgium is a European country. That's one determination. There are many others. It's a multi-ethnic country. It is the seat of the European Parliament. It is a country which had a colonial past. It's a country which is partly artificial, it's partly fabricated to serve the interest of the English historically. There are many other determinations. Yeah. So the subject in a judgment has many other determinations than the predicate which is attributed to the subject in the judgment, and the predicate usually extend beyond the subject. Namely, there are other singulars which share the predicate in common with the subject. For instance, if I say Per Byland is an economist, Paul Krugman is also an economist. Which one is better? Albania is also a European country. Yeah. Some roses are red. This cap is red as well. So not only the subject has many other determinations than the predicate, but the predicate extends to many other subjects. Usually, it's not always the case, but usually it extends to many other singulars. Yeah. So in a way, the subject exists beyond the predicate. Here it means it has other determination, and the predicate exists beyond the subject, namely there are other singular objects, or other subjects from a formal perspective to which the predicate can often be applied. I wrote, to judge means to think, to analyze, to separate, to distinguish, and here a remark by the German metaphysician. He says that all things are a judgment, which means that every object is a singular which contains within itself a universal. That's why all things are a judgment. This book is a book about political philosophy. So it is itself, in a way, it's a singular book, but there is a universality which goes beyond itself. This melon, it is a singular object, but it is also a melon and a fruit. So here that would be a syllogism, that would be the singular, the particular, and the universal tied together. This singular object is a melon, that's the particular, and the universal would be fruit, or formulated differently, the genus would be fruit, the species would be melon, and the individual would be this one melon. But it's a judgment in the sense that it's a singularization of a universal, and here the universal can be melon or fruit, yeah. But actually every physical object, precisely it is itself, but it is also the universal, namely a physical object. Yeah. That's why all things are a judgment, because they contain within themselves a singular aspect and a universal aspect, actually often many universal aspects, precisely because this melon is not just a singular object, it is also a melon, it is a fruit, it is an organic body, it is a physical body, like this is a cap supporting the restoration of America's greatness. This is also a commodity, this is an object which is red, this is a physical object, etc., etc. So there are many universals, yeah, but all things are singularized universals. In the language of Plato, all things are existing ideas, or a manifestation of their essence, or Plato would say an appearance of their idea, or an embodiment of their idea. The essentialist would say an existing occurrence of an essence, a manifestation of an essence. Yeah. So, all things are a judgment simply means all things are a singularization of a universal, or a singularized universality. To determine how things are, it can mean to express simple judgments from a logical standpoint, the ones I've illustrated. So in this simple sense, if to judge simply means to attribute a predicate to a subject, it is very easy to judge. Any thinking human can judge. Yeah. If whatever, if a child can speak, if he drinks fruit juice and says it is good, or it is he drinks I don't know, soup, it's too hot, that's a judgment. So in this sense, it's very simple. To be able to judge, it simply requires, in this very formal sense, to be able to think and to speak. Yeah. So that's just the formal aspect of the judgment. But what Hegel calls the judgment of the concept, it doesn't consist in predicating simple determinations to a singular object, to a subject. So here, the object, in a sense of an external reality, is the subject from the logical standpoint in the proposition, the logical proposition. The subject of the proposition, this is a melon, is the object in reality. So here, yeah. Here it's not philosophical, it's just to clarify. I wrote, yeah. The judgment of the concept, that's what I showed in some of the early drawings, object and concept. The judgment of the concept, however, consists in determining whether an object corresponds to its concept. In other words, we find back das Sollen, to determine whether the object is as it should be. Here I will say very intelligent things. To judge in the highest sense, in the most intelligent way, to judge does not consist in saying this cap is red, or this cost I don't know, $10 maybe. These are judgments which are true in a very poor, they are just accurate, yeah. They are just to say this cap is red, it's accurate, but it's not true in a philosophical sense. It's not false either, but it's just accurate. But truth in a higher sense precisely consists to be able to exert a real sense of judgment, to truly be able to judge, means to be able to determine whether or not an object is adequate to its concept, namely whether an object is as it should be. And here I will say very intelligent things that it has taken me a lot of time to understand, but hopefully I can communicate in a simple way while enlightening. I wrote, so to determine whether the object is as it should be means to determine whether the is and the ought, or the is and the should, whether they coincide or not. The is, namely reality, one might say, the is should coincide with the ought. The is supposed to be the way it has to be, in a way, the way it should be. So whether or not things are the way they should be, the way they are supposed to be, whether the ideal, formulated differently, whether the ideal and the real coincide, to judge means to determine precisely this, the adequation between the real and the ideal, the object and the concept, the is and the ought, or the is and the should. So I repeat what I wrote. The is should coincide with the ought, or the is ought to coincide with the should. In other words, the real and the ideal ought to match. This is truth, spiritual, mystical, speculative, religious, philosophical truth. When an object corresponds to its concept when it is adequate to what it is supposed to be, when reality coincides with the ideal. This is what the great, the exceptional German metaphysician called Wirklichkeit, and it happens to be philosophical truth in a way. Here, I wrote, Evola, Julius Evola, believes that the exceptional ought to be, or the exceptional should be used as a norm. So, that's not a mathematical, empirical norm, a mean, like in a bell curve. Yeah, that's where Evola and Hegel coincide in a way. So, that's a bell curve. The norm, the mean, the means, in a bell curve is in the middle. So the norm from a mathematical, empirical standpoint is that which is in the middle, where broadly half the population are in the middle, 25% over here, 25% over there. So to be normal, to take the norm as the mean is a mathematical, it's a democratic way of thinking. And here, well, it's not very, I'm not sure it's very useful, but here that would be an aristocratic way, namely the ideal from an aristocratic perspective would be that which stands above the rest, and that should be set as the norm. That's the way Evola thinks, namely the norm can mean the standard in a way. So Evola believes in his epistemology in a way that the exceptional should be precisely used as a norm. We should judge things not whether they are in the mathematical middle, whether they conform to the majority or the mass, that's democratic thinking in a way, but whether or not they conform, whether or not they are adequate to the exceptional, the ideal. And to match or to approximate or to get as close as possible to the ideal, to the exceptional. Here, the ideal means the exceptional, would be the goal, the purpose. I wrote, for Evola, as for Hegel, something is true to the extent that it corresponds to the ideal, and in the language of Plato it would be to the extent that it participates in the idea. So something from a Platonic perspective has more reality to the extent that it participates more to the idea to which it belongs. Where the reality contains a closer approximation or manifests a closer approximation to the idea in the view of Plato, or to the ideal in an aristocratic way. This is truth. That's why the divine in a way can be envisioned, or in polytheism, the gods, they are some sort of archetypes, and the mere mortals, they can try to, or they should try to imitate the divine ideal and to put their own individual behavior in adequation with the standards. These are inspiring figures. It can be envisioned like this. The classical gods, the wisdom of Athena, the sexual appeal of Aphrodite, the brilliance of Apollo, the strength of Mars, the wisdom and the wisdom and the intelligence and the strength of Odin or Thor in Nordic mythology, etc., etc. Or the Christians who try to imitate Christ. Yeah. Yeah. So I wrote, when it comes to judging, a critique, a movie critique, a gastronomy critique, or a political analyst, or whatever, whatever people exerting judgment in a sense that I mentioned earlier. So he has to exert judgment and to feel the formal aspect of the judgment, namely to associate a predicate to a subject with content derived from insight, knowledge, and expertise. Yeah. Here, I'm not an expert neither in cinema, gastronomy, or politics, but I've read a lot of books, so I can make some judgments. The Bell Curve by Charles Murray. So, to judge from a formal standpoint could be to say The Bell Curve is a book written by Charles Murray and Richard Ernstein. That's accurate. The Bell Curve was published in 1994. That's accurate. The Bell Curve was published by Simon & Schuster. The Bell Curve is written in English. It's a book about social sciences. It has brought about controversial debates in America, etc. These are accurate judgments, but to judge in a more philosophical sense means to... Here, it means first to extract the substantial determination, that which characterizes this book. And what I wrote is, in my view, The Bell Curve is one of the most important books in the social sciences published over the past 50 years at least. So to say The Bell Curve is a book published in 1994 and to say it's one of the most important books of social sciences of the past 50 years, the second judgment is more, it's more bold, but I'm quite confident. It's a different kind of judgment. Yeah. And here, if we use the judgment of the concept, namely, one might say that it's not the purpose of all books, but there are books whose purpose is to change the paradigm, the way of thinking, and to shake things up in the realm of whatever realm, social sciences, economics, politics, sociology, or whatever, philosophy, is to change, to make an impact. It's not the purpose of all books, because there are books which are just simply introductions or summaries in a way, or digest. There are books, or it's true for movies as well. Each producer has its own purpose in mind in a way. The purpose of a new important work by scholars which have spent a lot of time gathering data and shaping a new hypothesis to explain social realities is not the same as a handbook for students in sociology. Yeah. So if we judge in a sense, has this book is it adequate to the ideal of really being a defining work in its field, social sciences? The answer then would be yes. It hasn't received the acclaim or the praise that it deserves, maybe because it's controversial, but it has influenced the works like someone like Richard Lynn, it has been very influential, and it still is being read and debated, and it still influences a lot of people. So in a sense, it's really a truly great book. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll take another example. I will not pick up the book, but the book How to Think About the Economy by Per Bylund. It's really an exceptional book, not because it's a breakthrough in the field of economics, or not even Austrian economics, but it is not what it is supposed to be. The book, as an introduction to Austrian economics, is really exceptional because it's clear, it's rigorous, it's demanding, it's challenging, but it's accessible nonetheless. So, in this sense, here I will pick up the book nonetheless, but yeah. Precisely. To have a sense of judgment, to exert judgment, these two books, both are excellent, but in a way they cannot really be compared, because this book, the purpose when Mises wrote this was to restructure, reshape, and to bring a breakthrough in the realm of economics. And it's really a work, a scholarly work, that's the work of a lifetime. It's a magnum opus. It's really maybe the most important book of one of the most important economists in the history of economics, and one of the most important thinkers in the realm of social sciences of the 20th century. So that's really an exceptional book, and so it's really a great book for what it is supposed to do, namely to inspire generation of scholars. But this book is great as well, but in a different way. Namely, the ambition is not the same. First, because this book has already been written, and here it's a simplification in a good sense to make accessible, and also an attempt to popularize Austrian economics and to help those who are not accustomed to or not familiar with economics to help them think and discover a rigorous way of thinking about this discipline. So they cannot be compared, although they are in a way similar, because both are books about economics, both are books about Austrian economics. So in a way they are very similar, but also they are very different, because they do not seek to fulfill the same purpose. And this book, for what it does, it's really great as well. It's great in a different way. And if we had to write the history of economics, of course, this book would be much more prevalent than this one. But this one it's really an exceptional book nonetheless, because it makes complex ideas accessible in a simple way, and it's easy to read, it's shorter, etc., etc. And that's the same in movies. Movies, they do not have the same ambition, like restaurants, they do not have the same ambitions. You cannot expect to compare dishes served in a 4-star restaurant and dishes served in a very small restaurant where there's only one cook and one employee, or a 5-star restaurant, etc. You cannot compare. So yeah, that's why exerting judgment is very difficult in a way. Yeah, that's what it requires: insight, knowledge, expertise, experience, etc., etc. And to judge properly means to determine whether or not an object is adequate to its concept, namely to what it is supposed to be. Yeah. I wrote, eventually an object has to coincide with its concept. The gap between the real and the ideal has to be closed or to be reduced. Yeah. And I wrote yeah. Yeah. So the dynamic, the ontological dynamic of reality. Here it's very profound, very intelligent. What I say. I borrow the ideas from Hegel, but actually it's kind of true. Ontology, reality, being, whatever is moved by the attempt to make reality and the idea which drives the movement. How does the idea emerges out of being? That's more complex, but basically ontology is moved by a process of trying to make reality adequate to the idea, formulated religiously, God realizing its plan through history. Yeah. So something is true and good to the extent that it is adequate to what it is supposed to be. Yeah. And I wrote, the good, here it's intelligent, the good presupposes the ideal. Precisely the good in this perspective is that which is adequate to the idea. The bad here is what is inadequate. The flaccid penis, it's bad in a sense that if the purpose is to produce children with a fertile, consenting, and preferably hot woman, a flaccid penis is bad in a sense that it is inadequate to what it is supposed to be. Here I will make a joke. Maybe the wife has to do something to to correct the situation. Honey, das Sollen requires that you do something because the object is not adequate to... no, okay. No, but here it's kind of serious. Bad, good and bad can be envisioned philosophically. That which is good is that which approximates the idea and the ideal, and that which is bad is that which is inadequate in a way, and formulated differently. What is inappropriate is bad, that which is not adequate, and actually that's in a way that's how most people envision good and bad or good and evil. What is bad is that which should not happen or that which should not be. So people, when they talk about good and bad, they have a pre-planned view of what is good, and they call bad that which is not adequate to the ideal that they envision. Yeah. When things are not as they should be, they are considered bad. Here that's Hegelian view, but actually a bad state, in a way, it's not a real state. A bad husband is not a real husband. A badly built house is not a real house. In a way, they are, because precisely the badly built house still enables to recognize the idea of a house. A bad husband or a bad government, etc. We still recognize the government or the husband, but actually if it is real in a sense of true, it has to be good. It has to be adequate to its own concept. A real house, in a sense of a good house, it has to be functional and able to live within it decently. A real husband is a good husband which takes care of his wife, his children, his household, etc. A real state, a state which does what it is supposed to do. It protects the citizen, it protects liberty, property, and it favors the condition for the flourishing of human accomplishment. This is what a state is supposed to do. Yeah. So when things are not as they should be, so when the Das Sollen hasn't been fulfilled, they are considered bad. And here a question, philosophical in ordinary sense, if sometimes when things are judged to be inadequate, is it because the object is not what it is supposed to be, so the object in a way is unfit, it's not in accordance with its concept, or is it the subject, here subject means the individual human who judges, is it the object which is not adequate to what it is supposed to be, or is it the subject which is ignorant or stupid or dishonest or yeah. Basically, the question formulated differently. Negative judgment here, it means in a sense of considering that something is bad. Is it because it really is bad? Is it the object who is faulty? Or is it the person who makes the judgment which is ignorant or dishonest or incompetent, etc.? Yeah. Ava Max wrote a song, Maybe You're the Problem. Yeah. That's what she talks about in the song, actually. Is it she who is not adequate as a female partner? I don't see any reason why she couldn't be or why she shouldn't be. Or is it her ex-boyfriend who was inadequate? Yeah. I don't see any problem with Ava Max. Yeah. Yeah. So here, yeah, about truth in a philosophical sense. So first, in ordinary sense, adequation. In ordinary sense, truth means adequation between the mind or the intellect or the representation that we have and the object or reality or the thing. In Latin, adequatio rei et intellectus, namely the adequation between the thing and the intellect. So, truth from classical perspective means to set your mental representation, your intellect in a way, in adequation with the thing that you talk about or that you are trying to know. And if the intellect and the thing, if they coincide, if the representation, the mental representation, it can be in the form of a theorem, a hypothesis, a proposition, etc., etc., a belief, a theory, etc. If the mental representation is adequate to the thing that it is supposed to describe or to talk about, then it is considered to be true. And in this sense, the physics is true because there is the mental representation, there are the objects out there, and when experiments are performed, the objects, most of the time, they behave in a way, they move as predicted by the theory. Most of the time, then they are very complex, but most of the time, physics is considered to be true because objects behave as the theory, the mental representation, predicts that they should behave. Yeah. And when they don't, it forces the physicist to reformulate a different paradigm, Einstein, and then quantum physics, etc., etc. Yeah. So, for Kant, truth is inaccessible because of the limitation of our faculty of knowing, precisely because in the view of Kant, our reason, our mind is limited structurally, ontologically, one say, so we cannot know the Ding an sich, as he calls this. We cannot know, we can only believe. We can know the phenomena and find the regularities about the phenomenal world, but we cannot know the noumenal realm, that which is supposed to stand beyond the phenomena, because our faculty of knowing, our pure reason, enters into contradiction with itself and cannot, our knowledge in a way is finite. Yeah. That's why the infinite for Kant has to be sought in practical behavior, because our own noumenal self, if that's not how he formulated it, but our transcendental self, in a way, can actualize, or should, or soll, has to actualize through ethical behavior, the infinite, in a way, God, in a way, to behave ethically, according to Kant, but through knowledge of the external world, we can only know the phenomena. What stands behind the phenomena, it cannot be known because of the limitations of our faculty of knowing. So truth for Kant is inaccessible in epistemology. It may only be accessed in ethics. Yeah. That's why the ethical views of Kant are derived from his epistemology. Die Kritik der Praktical Vernunft is derived from, is a consequence of the book Die Kritik der reinen Vernunft. Yeah. But for Hegel, truth precisely is the adequation of the adequation between an object and its own concept. So it is not our mind which has to be adequate to the thing, although it is as well, but actually it's the object which has to be true to itself. So the object has to be adequate to itself. And this is truth for Hegel. Yeah. Here a little bit of psychology about marriage. I wrote how to compliment women philosophically. How to compliment your wife philosophically. Darling, you are exactly the way you ought to be. With you, honey, das Sollen coincides with your Dasein. Yeah. You shouldn't be any different from how you currently are. You are an ideal woman, a real woman. You are the ideal woman. If you say to your wife, you are an ideal woman, she might suspect that there might be others, so that she might become suspicious. So you have to say, you are not just an ideal woman, you are the ideal woman. It's impossible for you to be any better than you already are, honey. You cannot improve because you are already the best. Yeah. So das Sollen has no power over you because you are exactly as you are supposed to be. You are as you have to be. You are adequate to your concept of an ideal wife. Yeah. And I want you the way you are right now forever. That's how you have to talk to women, to your wife eventually. You have to say to her, honey, I want you to be the way you are right now forever. Actually, no, you can say, I want you to be the way you are right now forever, but eventually you remove the to be and you just say, I want you the way you are right now forever. That's how you talk philosophically to to your wife. Yeah. And here something very intelligent. In ordinary language, from the perspective of women, a real man is an ideal man. When women talk about, that's a real man, actually what they mean is, that's an ideal man. An ideal man, from a perspective of a woman, is actually a man who behaves as a real man, who is really a masculine. That's the ideal man. So the ideal and the real, they coincide. In the mind of hypergamous females, of course, I wrote, women are speculative philosophers. I laugh, but actually, it's kind of subtle, but there's an element of truth, namely, a man who is a real man for a woman, that's paradoxically, but actually from a speculative standpoint, it's not paradoxical, a man who is a real man, that's precisely the ideal man. Yeah. Okay. So now about Wirklichkeit. Yeah. Wirklichkeit, in a way, that's another word for philosophical truth, in a way. When the inner and the outer coincide, when the essence and its phenomenon coincide, when the object coincides with its concept, that's wirklich, in a way, that's Wirklichkeit. That's reality in a higher sense, that's truth, in a way, philosophical truth. And I wrote, Ron Paul, Charles Murray, Thomas Sowell, and Jeff Deist, they are real Americans. So in a way, they are conceptual Americans. They are American archetypes, because with these men, the ideal of the modern American, in a good sense, actually the classical American within modernity, is being realized. These are people who are adequate to the concept of what a classical American ought to be. Namely, they are intelligent, of course, well-read. They are the carriers and the embodiment of the classical ideals of the Constitution and Jeffersonian ideals, in a way. Success through hard work, but also with a civic responsibility, in a way. And they are faithful to the ideal of liberty, to the American ethos. They are different, but they all embody the classical ideal, in a way. Yeah. The European gods, those that I've called the European gods, in a way, these are conceptual Europeans, people who have gone through a reconstruction process, a re-establishment of their identity, a recovery and a rediscovery of their ancestral memory. Yeah, and I wrote, people in modernity who have had spiritual experiences, the people that I have had spiritual experiences with, in a way, these are subjects, both logical, in the sense of propositional logic, and human subject individuals, which have been exploring all their predicates, who have come to know themselves, who have been on a process of self-knowledge, of self-discovery, of completeness, a search for completeness and perfection, in the sense of perfecting themselves through discovering themselves and the world. Yeah. People who have investigated anthropology, their ethnic identity, their gender, their IQ, and psychology in general, morality, culture, a political ethos, who have searched or rediscovered their artistic, religious, and philosophical legacy, while also having a view of a cosmic view in relation to the harmony with nature in a way. So the people who have had spiritual experiences while embarking upon a process of self-discovery, discovery of the world and of themselves, these are people that I've called the European gods, and they are in a way conceptual Europeans, namely they are in the process of becoming adequate to their own concept, and they have to fill the empty predicate European with a content, because what happens in modernity in the 21st century is Europeans are reconstructing their identity because they are in a process, or they have been deconstructed. They are in the process of being erased, and by revolting against this process of erasure, they try to reconstruct unconsciously by rediscovering themselves and their legacy and rediscovering the world, because by studying one aspect, whether anthropology, psychology, politics, etc., they step by step reconstruct the view of the totality. So a subject here, it means, it both means the individual and also from a logical standpoint, but an individual human subject which explores the universal from different standpoints, a subject which reflects upon its own predicates, its own determination, namely who comes to know itself anthropologically in terms of ethnicity, gender, psychology, intelligence, morality, culture, politics, art, religion, philosophy, etc., etc. It's a process of self-knowledge. It's an alchemical process, actually. And the gods, in the modern world, these are people who have become self-knowing individuals. They are becoming adequate to their own concept. Yeah. Yeah. Because, here, a little bit of esoteric cosmic view, the microcosm and the macrocosm, individuals, they are embedded within a cosmic set of relationships of all sorts, and by coming to know themselves or the world in which they live, and actually come to know both and to discover themselves and discover the world in which they live, eventually they will rediscover their divine self by acquiring knowledge in a way. Yeah. But the purpose is not only to acquire theoretical knowledge, but then to practice ethical behavior in a way. I wrote, what is an sich, what is in itself, has to become for itself. So human individuals, human subjects, they can think about their own universality, namely, human can think about their socio-biological self, their anthropological self, their gender, their language, their intelligence. They can come to know themselves through this determination, but also to know how the world and others are structured. They can get to know political, economic, sociological views, learn to know about ethics, morality, discover or rediscover their artistic, philosophical, religious legacy, etc., etc. And by acquiring this knowledge, by reconstructing what has been deconstructed, by re-establishing what has been erased, those who embark upon this process and who think more thoroughly, they end up eventually having spiritual experiences, because precisely spirit in a way is a process of self-reconstruction in a way. Yeah. I wrote, all humans have a gender, an ethnicity, a quantitative determination of intelligence, a language, they are determined economically, etc., politically, etc. They live in a certain set of legislative determinations. They have a religious legacy, etc. But only those who study these topics get to know the universals which move them. So they get to know, in a way, their own concepts. The ignorance wander blindly. And what happens with people who travel a lot spiritually while incorporating scientific knowledge, so it's both a journey for the soul, a journey of self-discovery, but also a journey for the mind of scientific investigation. They are partly connected. So it's a discovery of the self and of the world. And those who embark upon this journey, eventually what they unconsciously try to do is to re-establish the identity between themselves and their concept, as I've defined it, namely to become what they have to be. Werde der du bist, become who you are. But it's unconscious as of now. But that's what drives the process, an attempt to re-establish self-identity. And the problem and the solution in the modern world is that Europeans are no longer how they are supposed to be. Namely, Europeans have lost their culture, their ethics, their religion, their legacy, their traditions, etc., etc. And because they have lost all of this, they are unconsciously in a process of trying to gather, to preserve, to rediscover, to recover what has been lost. And this process of acquiring knowledge is precisely a spiritual process. And I wrote, so to conclude, being, precisely this is what I've been talking about, is not as it should be. That's Sollen, the divide within being, but it's a process of trying to become as it is supposed to be, to reach the purpose. So being, in a way, is inadequate to itself. That's why it's dynamic, that's why it's moving. And the reason why human beings sometimes or often suffer psychologically is because human beings are beings, and being is inadequate to itself. And that's why human, when they suffer psychologically, it's because they are inadequate to themselves. They are not fulfilled, they are not realized in a sense of spiritual realization, development. So they are not how they are supposed to be. And trying to overcome this inadequacy, to heal the divide, is precisely the purpose of psychological development and philosophy eventually. And I wrote, Europeans have lost their identity. In a way, a lot of humans have, but it has been more intense among Europeans. So they are in a process of reconstructing this identity, this relationship to their authentic self, re-establishing it, reconstructing it, recovering the lost memory. And the process of God is the infinite, which makes itself finite and seeks to re-establish the relation to itself after having been alienated, and to re-establish infinity. You know, that's the process, the Trinitarian process. Yeah. The good thing about losing one's own memory or losing what one once possessed, the good thing is that it enables one to recover, rediscover, re-establish what has been lost and to recreate oneself. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I could say. I've been talking for 3 hours about speculative logic and ontology. I have said very intelligent things. Yeah. Being is moved by an attempt, a search of trying to bridge, to heal the divide within itself. That's what drives the process of being eventually. Yeah. And here I will conclude with my document about ethics. My ideal, that's my personal ideal, but when you find something good, you want to share it with others. The ideal of self-realization, independence, autonomy, wisdom, and liberty. In a way, that's my spiritual ideal. That which eventually has to be aimed at and reached. The purpose, and all these are intermediary steps which enable to facilitate, to enable, to bring about the conditions which make the purpose reachable in a way. But the ideal of liberty, my view actually of self-realization, it's partly psychological, but here I have a Western perspective. The Eastern, you know, the Eastern aspect, if we talk about Eastern and Western philosophy or mysticism, etc., the Eastern aspect would be individual self-realization, and the Western aspect would be realization through objektiver Geist, namely social interactions and politics in a broader sense, not politicians' politics, but politically, namely to not only to realize oneself as an individual from a mystical, individualistic perspective, but to bring about, that's the active aspect, to bring about changes in the institutional structures to favor, enable the realization of others as well, and in a way to realize oneself within a community of free individuals. That's the purpose actually, and what I call the American ideal. In my view, here in the year 2023, the highest achievement from a political standpoint, in my view, of mankind has been the best aspect of the American experience, American exceptionalism, because it was a collective achievement, and it still is partly for those who are carriers of the American spirit, what I say. It's the realization of a community of free individuals. So there is the community, but there are the individuals, and there is freedom. The free, in a way, there has to be realized individuals, a realized community. Here, I'm talking about politics. A realized community and liberty. And that's the best approximation. There have been other successes, but there have been very functional, harmonious societies and communities. There have been very successful individuals, but bringing forth and encouraging and aiming towards the fulfillment of communities of realized individuals, either psychologically in terms of balance, maturity, growth. In a way, that's what Charles Murray, Thomas Sowell, and Ron Paul embody. But also, so that would be the psychological aspect, namely people who are mature and balanced and ethical in a way, who embody a certain view of ethics, which here means equality, but in a good sense, not egalitarianism, but an ideal of equality through liberty, or liberty realized through the recognition of other equals who have themselves realized as free agents, autonomous agents. So the psychological realization, but also the political one, namely, with the economic aspect, namely to bring forth the condition which enable individuals to realize themselves psychologically, but also to achieve, to exteriorize their talent, their ability to the best extent possible. And this is what the United States has offered and has enabled and provided and still does. But yeah, there would have to be the political harmony. That would be the goal, the ideal, political harmony, while preserving, promoting the greatest amount of liberty possible, individual psychological realization, but also individuals who realize themselves by being able to harmoniously interact with others, while also having the collective conditions which promote, in a way, competition in a good sense, in a sense of trying to produce the best achievements. So that's when America succeeds, and it has succeeded a lot and still does, this is what it produces. Communities of self-governing individuals, individuals who interact among equals. Maybe here, maybe I'm deluding myself a little bit about America, but I don't think I am. Maybe I romanticize a little bit, but actually no. Self-grown individuals who interact as free agents with one another, partly in a competitive way to bring about the best in terms of achievements, but also in a civic way, in a sense of strong sense of community, which have to be tied by eventually culture and religion, a common, shared cultural frame in a way, but a liberating frame, not an enclosing one. Yeah, this ideal in the realm of politics, that's the ideal. A political entity of free agents, but with equality, but not material equality, but equality in a sense of recognition. A society where people recognize one another as equals, not because they are materially equal, or not even because they believe that they are equally talented, but equal in the sense that they acknowledge that all, or at least most, or all participate in the community and all have a place. They all belong. That's the idea of Charles Murray. A society where everyone can find a place and everyone is respected to the extent that he contributes to the well-being of the community, of course, but he's respected as a productive member of society. Yeah, but productivity does not necessarily have to be just economic. It can be participating in the life of the community, organizing the cultural or religious life, etc., etc. Yeah. That's the ideal that Charles Murray talks about. A place for everyone. Yeah. For Madison, the great Republican principle was that the common people would have the public spiritedness and the information necessary to choose men of virtue and wisdom to govern them. For both Jefferson and Madison, political equality was both right and workable. They would have been amazed by the notion that humans are equal in any other sense. John Adams agreed that natural aristocracy is a fact essential to be considered in the institution of government. A good policy must be in accordance with what is good for human beings, and that what is good for humans must be based on an understanding it must be based on an understanding of how they are similar and how they differ. Yeah. Yeah. A society where there is a place for everyone. Of all the rewards we can confer on each other, the most precious is a place as a valued fellow citizen. Yeah, that's kind of the ideal, the Western ideal, namely the Western idea goes beyond the mere psychological realization like the Indian mystics, of course. The wisdom and the insights of the Indian philosophers have to be acknowledged, of course, but the West has a tendency to go outward, to exteriorize itself and to realize itself through politics in the broadest sense, and the ideal is precisely that which I've just mentioned. Yeah. Of all the rewards we can confer on each other, the most precious is a place as a valued fellow citizen. That's the political ideal. Liberty to the greatest extent possible and desirable and achievable, with a civic aspect, namely not the liberty to just go about one's own business and to make money, but a civic liberty, an aristocratic republican liberty. Yeah, liberty, republic, aristocracy. These ideals are maybe the most noble in Western politics. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, it's very difficult because of that Sollen, the gap which has to be filled. It requires a lot of efforts. Well, that's what I could say about ontology and logic and idealism in more than 3 hours. Yeah. I received a book today. Yeah. It has been a great gift. So, yeah. I will take the time to read the book. Yeah. Yeah. So I will stop the recording here. That's what I intended to talk about. Das Sollen, reality, idealism, the logic of judgment. I will rewatch the video, and hopefully it can enlighten. I have said really intelligent things on a very complex topic, a very complex way of thinking, but not unnecessarily so. I mean, sometimes that's the problem with the Germans, a tendency to over-complexify, but sometimes reality is genuinely complex, and to think correctly requires intellectual efforts. So here I have tried to say really complex things which are nonetheless important and significant and relevant to help understand how reality is structured. Yeah. And here, just a remark about ethics. Of course, das Sollen is a source of, in a way, of dissatisfaction and suffering, precisely because things, for most people, are not the way we think they ought to be. So there is this divide which brings about suffering, because there is inadequacy between reality as it is, or as we think it is, and how we envision this, or how we would like it to be. And philosophy, the purpose of philosophy precisely is to reduce the disconnect between how things are and how they should be. And ethics is a means to reduce this bridge, this gap, this bridge, this divide, precisely because when one behaves ethically, the purpose is to bring about changes in the world which are supposed to go into the direction of making the world more adequate to what it is supposed to be. So to realize the ideal, and in a way, acting ethically, that's here a Kantian view, in a way it's a reward in itself, because when you do what you believe is right or correct from an ethical standpoint, you have the satisfaction, the inner satisfaction of doing what is right. Yeah. It's not always easy, actually it's often difficult to determine what is right, and then to determine the means of bringing about what is true from an ethical standpoint. So first you have to find what has to be achieved, and then how to achieve what has to be achieved. It's very difficult, but in a way I know, yeah, it's biochemistry teaches us basically that when people behave virtuously, they are rewarded by chemical releases in their brain which makes them feel good. That's the trick, the chemical trick maybe that God uses in order to produce goodness in the world. When people do good, usually they are rewarded. Maybe they can be rewarded because others will do good to them directly or indirectly in one way or another. Maybe, yeah. But also its own reward, because when you do something which you know is good, it's satisfying to to do it in a way. And if things were, I will try to end up on a positive note, if things were the way they are supposed to be, there wouldn't be anything to do. So, an optimistic view about the difficulties of existence is that precisely the difficulty of the human condition is that things are not, often they are not how they should be, maybe in order for things to be good for everyone, or to be good most of the time for most people, but precisely it leaves room, that's Sollen, here that's the view of Fichte, because things are not as they could be, or as they should be, or they are not ideal, maybe. Maybe because of that, it gives the impetus, the drive to realize the ideal, and if it is done in a reasonable way, it is a satisfaction to struggle, not in a sense of struggle can mean to encounter hardships or to fight in a way, not necessarily physically or literally, but to struggle in a way, to compete in a way, to struggle in order to achieve the good. And because the good is not always there, or not always present for everyone, or not at all moments in the life of an individual, there are very difficult moments, etc. Because the good, in a way, is not always there, or because humans are wired to act in order to bring it about, it's a struggle which in a way is rewarding when that's the religious incentive, whether people are consciously religious or not, because a lot of leftists who are atheists, they are driven by the search for chemical rewards and practicing virtue. But to try to do good, to try to behave ethically, in a way it's a struggle, because it requires it demands sacrifice on the part of the self, and even if the person is dedicated, the consequences of his action are not always appreciated, or they are not always understood, or the reward that might be expected does not necessarily come, or it doesn't come as it is envisioned. But precisely that's why, here that's the Kantian view, acting righteously, because this is what has to be done, in a way it's its own reward. Here I will end in a Kantian poetic view. Kant was not very poetic always, but the Kantian morality consists in saying that the purpose of morality is not to become happy, but to become worthy of happiness. That virtue, in a Kantian view, that's kind of a Stoic view, virtue consists in practicing virtue, not necessarily to be happy, because people can be sometimes virtuous and suffer nonetheless, but practice virtue in order to be worthy of eventually finding happiness. Yeah. That's why, of course, the Kantian view, the problem with the Kantian view is that it's a morality based on principles and not on consequences. It's not utilitarian, so there's no guarantee that it's always very efficient, because precisely a utilitarian view of ethics means that an action is judged by the results that it brings about, the consequences that it brings, whereas a Kantian view means it has to be adequate to a set of principles. So, in a way, to act according to certain set of principles, it's rewarding in itself, even if the consequences are not as efficient as they ought to be or as they could be, or yeah. Yeah. I will end really with a positive remark. Of course, existence is sometimes very difficult, but to know that there is an invisible force which encourages people to behave ethically and to act for the good. If people want to call this God, that's great. Whether people believe in God or not, it's not relevant, because there are people who are atheistic and who are very idealist in a political sense. Here it's in a good sense. Political idealism here means simply the idea that one has to act to bring about benefits for either the community or the group or the whole of mankind, depending on how they envision this. But the idea that there is an invisible presence which is absent while being present, which drives people to behave ethically, either because they are believers and they want to call this God, or because they might be atheist or non-believers, but not in a classical religious view of God, but they just believe that goodness is a goal which has to be aimed towards, no matter how difficult it might be to reach. But at least the people who are driven by this ideal, and here I have to praise the idealists, even those whose ideas I do not necessarily share on a personal level, the views, but in a way there has to be respect for people who are idealistically inclined, even if they make mistakes in the means that they use. They can be clumsy or delusional or naive. Well, there are those who are really but those who are just either naive or clumsy or delusional or but they are nonetheless idealistically inclined. In a way, these people, they have to be praised, at least for trying to bring good. And here I think, for instance, about the ecologist. A lot of ecologists, they are very well intentioned. Not all of them, but a lot of them are well intentioned, and they are trying to do good. It's not always very efficient. It's not always very moral, because they use sometimes means which are dubious. But those who dedicate their life to trying to bring, even if personally I do not necessarily believe in all of their views, but it has to be respected nonetheless. And the religious people who behave ethically because they believe whatever entity or however they want to call the entity they believe in, they have to be respected as well, even if you disagree sometimes with the ends that they seek or with the means that they use. Of course, there are cases where either the ends or the means or both are not praiseworthy, of course. But sometimes, most of the time, people who try to do good with whatever limited means they have at their disposal, it's worthy of respect. Yeah. Even if you disagree with them politically. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I could say. I have really said really intelligent things in this video. I know this. I don't want to to praise myself, but sometimes when I read some of my ideas, I wouldn't say that I am proud. That would be maybe vanity or arrogance or whatever. But sometimes, if I have to be honest, I haven't read German metaphysics for more than 8 months, probably, or maybe even more. But I'm capable of saying intelligent things, maybe bring contributions of my own, partly, to German metaphysics. That's difficult to... What does Per Bylen say about standing... he wrote in the introductory, it's not the preface, it's the first page basically, to Karl Menger, Ludwig von Mises, and the other giants upon whose shoulders I have the great honor of standing. Yeah, it's difficult to make contributions to Austrian economics because there have been giants in the past. To make contributions to German metaphysics, it's even more difficult. I'm not saying that I will succeed. Everything has probably already been said. Yeah, but at least maybe to really make complex ideas, which are not uselessly or mindlessly complex, but who are complex because sometimes reality really is complex and it requires efforts to think seriously, intelligently, diligently, in a relevant way about complex topics, to make this accessible without too much oversimplification. Yeah. That's what I could say. So I will stop the video here.